Rick Santorum wants Pope Francis to shut up about climate change. That's right. Santorum, who is a devout Catholic, was talking to Philadelphia radio host Dom Giordano earlier this week, and basically told him that, hey, the Pope, he should leave science to the scientists. He said this, quote, "The church has gotten it wrong a few times on science." Oh, really? "And I think that we probably are better off leaving science to the scientists and focusing on what we're really good at, which is theology and morality. When we get involved with political and controversial scientific theories, I think the church is not as forceful or as critical." Now, what's interesting about this is that Rick Santorum likes to comment on climate change a lot, even though he's not a scientist. And so it's kind of ironic that he points out that, hey, Pope, you should stop talking about climate change, man. Leave it to the scientists, the 97% of climate scientists that you disagree with. Okay, well, that's interesting. That's interesting that you're going to say that. Now, he is a huge fan of the Pope. Odd that you can be a huge fan of the Pope. Very interesting. And he appreciates his commitment to family issues, but he wants the church to stay out of science. Well, that's interesting, as I said, because I think that, the Pope, he's getting ready to do an encyclical on climate change, where he's going to talk about how climate change is kind of not only just an environmental issue or a political issue, it's also a theological issue. Now, you talk to some people who are religious and on the left, and there are people that are there, and they'll say things like, hey, God gave us this creation, but they didn't mean for us to fucking trash it. And that's essentially what we're doing at this point. Now, if you were somebody on the left who was Christian, you'd be like, yeah, exactly. God didn't just give us this thing to fuck it up. He actually wants us to be good stewards of the earth. Now, people like Rick Santorum don't agree. Now, the funny part of this, as well, to make a sort of ridiculous point on this, is that Rick Santorum, as I said, leave science to the scientists. Turns out Pope Francis, kind of a scientist. Interesting. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, not technically a scientist. So I'm being a little dishonest here. But he has a degree as a chemical technician. And he worked as a chemist before turning to the priesthood. So he studied chemistry. I know that's not climate science. It's still science. If you're going to get technical, Pope Francis is a scientist, in a way. He studied science. He might actually kind of know what he's talking about. As I said, he's not a climate scientist, which 97% of the world's climate scientists are still saying, we have a problem with climate change. It is man-made. You should probably listen to us. And now that the Pope is saying it and echoing that same agreement with 97% of the world scientists, hopefully he's going to get people to listen. He's trying to get people to listen because he does agree with the science. And here's the thing. I'm sorry, Rick Santorum, but even if you don't agree with the science, that doesn't make the science untrue.